computer. And we are doing a 2-week study on Jesus's trial. And I always say this, I'm real excited about this. And I just love to learn new things. And this is going to be an interesting study. So we're going to divide it into 2 weeks. The first week is the Jewish trial, if you will, and the second week is the Roman trial. And the thought here is we're 3 weeks out from Easter, and these are stories, whether you've been active churchgoers or not, you have heard them over and over again, and we hope to be able to hear them with new ears this time, because there's a lot there. One of the things we try to do is make sure we understand what was going on in the time. And as we prepared for this, we realized that there's a lot of things that we just wouldn't know unless you studied.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So we're going to start with, Scott's going to give a background of basically where we are going into this week, because obviously the trial takes place, they believe, on Thursday night and Friday morning.
Okay, so since we're off to a late start, I better hit this thing running. There are a few things we need to set some background. Most of you, know about from Jesus' birth about Herod. What most people don't know is that's not the same Herod at the time of his death. The one at the time of his birth was Herod the Great. That was the father. At the time of his death is the son, Herod Antipas. Herod is sort of the family name. And what happened was the father died, and he was an ally to the Romans. He was somebody they really trusted and respected, not so much the kids. So they divided his empire up into 4 parts, and each one was what's called a tetrarch, a ruler. There are 4 rulers. And so the kingdom is, been divided up, and then one of the sons died, and they give that section to Pilate, the one with Jerusalem. But the important part is, first of all, it's not the same Herod. And the second one is, because they've been divided up, when we get to the part where Jesus is being tried and crucified, we know about him being sent to Herod, and that's in Jerusalem. But the Herod that's alive at that time doesn't live in Jerusalem. When they cut the kingdom into 4 parts, he got the part up at the Sea of Galilee. Actually, the weird thing is he got 2 different pieces that are not even connected. The main one is up at the Sea of Galilee, and he built a town there called Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. But he's got another section on the opposite side of the Jordan River. And there, it becomes important. But so the only reason that Herod is involved in the trial and crucifixion is because he was in town, he was in Jerusalem for Passover. If it hadn't been Passover, he would have been back where he lives. He has no real authority in Jerusalem, the way this works, but he was there because they get bored out in the countryside, and when there's something big going on, he travels to Jerusalem for Passover. Only reason he's there. And then the last part is that of the background is this trial and crucifixion take place at Passover, just at the beginning of the Passover celebration. And there are a lot, we're not even going to get into all of that, but there are a tremendous number of similarities. There are references when he's led like a lamb to the slaughter. The coordination between Passover and the Passover lamb and Jesus is a whole other study. So with that in mind, can you bring up the map of the tetrarch?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure why I would let her push buttons today, but okay.
Okay, look at this.
And you know what? I don't like gripe about my wife ever, but when it comes to technology, she's very good. She's very, very good. Thank you. I need to be so real quick. If you can see this, down the middle of this map is up at the top is the Dead Sea. Well, that's the headwaters, but is the Sea of Galilee. That's the Sea of Galilee. And then the Jordan River flows down, and down at the bottom, that body of water is the Dead Sea. So back up here, this kind of maroon color, you can see that there's one section here and one section down here on the opposite side, where the pointer is, on the opposite side of the Jordan River, the east bank. That's Herod, the Herod we're talking about now, the son. That's his area, which is very strange. They didn't like him very much. I think they gave him an area split like that for a reason. But this here is the Sea of Galilee, and this is Tiberias. This is the city that he built on the Sea of Galilee. That's his headquarters. Jerusalem is all the way down here, straight out from the kind of the top end of the Dead Sea. So Jesus had been up in this Galilee area, and he's been teaching, and the crowds have been increasing all the time. And then he finally says, it's time. The time has arrived. And he just heads for Jerusalem. Now, during the last study, I told you repeatedly that he just went headlong for Jerusalem and the crucifixion. And it is good. This one's working. He leaves. When he finally leaves, by the way, this is Tiberias. Up here at the top is Capernaum. You hear about that a lot. But when he leaves, he starts heading down. Is that another participant?
No.
He starts heading down through Herod's territory. And
sorry.
When he gets down here to this kind of bottom part, if you can see that, he jumps across. They go across the Jordan, and he continues down the east bank and stays in Herod's territory. He's a Galilean. And as such, he falls under the jurisdiction of Herod Antipas, Herod the son. And he stays in his jurisdiction. And there's some reasons for that. But for one thing, Herod has authority in this area and in this area. He has no authority over here, no authority through there. And this all has to play out in a particular way. And so we studied before, but there's a point where Herod sends sort of these messengers come and say, Herod's looking for you. Herod wants to bring you in. And Jesus sort of sends this, he calls Herod an old fox, and he basically says, I'm not coming in. But he does all these things to get the Jews and Herod angry at him. He's not dumb. So you know this is intentional, but he stays down through here because he stays in Herod's jurisdiction. And as he's going down, let's unshare this now. Stop share. I'm going to read some things that went on during this journey south. And there are these go throughout the Gospels. There are all these references. When the chief priests and scribes heard this, they looked for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of them because the crowd was astonished at his teaching. There's another that was in, and I'm just reading a bunch of them. I guess I could tell you that was in Mark 11. Further down in Mark 11, it says they were afraid of the people, and that being the Jewish leaders. In Mark 12, at this, the teachers sought to arrest Jesus, for they knew he had spoken this parable against them, but fearing the crowd, they left him and went away. Luke 20. In his teaching, Jesus also said, watch out for the scribes. Beware the scribes. These are these experts in the law. And he says it in the hearing of everyone, including the scribes. He says, watch out for the scribes. They like to walk around in long robes, to receive greetings in the marketplaces, and have the chief seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They defraud widows of their houses. Imagine saying this in front of the people. They defraud widows of their houses and for show make lengthy prayers. These men will receive greater condemnation. And I'm going to do a few more. I mean, I've got a stack of these, but it talks about it was the time of the Passover, and the chief priests and scribes were looking for covert ways to arrest Jesus and kill him, but not during the feast, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. Let's see, I've got one or two more because I think.
Scott, I know we're hurrying, but we have the people, we have the Jews, we have the army, the Romans. When you say they're afraid of the people, are they talking about their fellow Jews who are getting this insult?
They are. These are the elites. These are the people who run things, and the common people. Jesus has begun to build these large crowds. When he does ride into Jerusalem, he comes in this triumphant king. He comes in, and the people are saying, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." And the crowds have gotten so large. What I'm trying to get at here, one of the big things is that the leaders have long since determined they're going to arrest him and kill him, but they're afraid. And so we'll talk about a couple of reasons why they're afraid. One of the reasons is obviously they're a big crowd. They don't want to riot. But Rome values peace and stability above just about everything else. Rome is building an empire that's so big, you can't possibly control the people by force over that much area. So they try to make sure that anyone who's disturbing the peace gets beaten down quickly. And if some leader is responsible for allowing things to get out of hand, they're in trouble. And so these crowds begin to come up. The Jews in all of Israel, Jerusalem, they have a sort of an unusual self-rule. They get allowed to do their own thing so long as it doesn't interfere with Rome. And so they have autonomy that is, pretty exceptional even in the Roman Empire.
Is it an autonomy at both levels, religion and government?
As long as it doesn't interfere with Roman policies.
Taxation.
Yeah, they have their own taxation. They have temple taxes. They have all those things.
No.
Yeah. So they have this. They have tremendous authority and power within a Roman Empire that doesn't always allow this. They don't want anything messing it up. There are other guys out in the countryside who are rebels that get these uprisings, these followings, and they go help get the Romans to help, and they stamp them out. But Jesus has never stepped over the line. And he never says, "I want you guys to follow me and we're going to go take down these Romans." He never even approaches that kind of government. That's there's a song, Crosby, Stills, Nash song that says he says Jesus Christ was the first nonviolent revolutionary. Jesus wasn't leading a revolution. He had nothing to do with the Romans. If you read through, he's not condemning the Romans. He's condemning the leaders of Judaism often. So these guys, what they do see is that Jesus has these huge crowds. They've begun to suggest, well, they're saying he's a prophet. And there's begun to be these rumblings that he's Mashiach, he's the Messiah. And the implication, a lot of them believe that the Messiah is going to rise up and overthrow the Romans. And these leaders are afraid of that. And they're afraid of the mob. They're afraid of things getting out of control. And he has made this run down the east bank of the Jordan through Herod's territory and has insulted them. Now, he's right. Don't get me wrong. The things he says are absolutely correct. But to say things like, beware of the scribes, they defraud widows of their houses in front of them. And so they've already decided they're going to take him and they're going to kill him. And that's important because we're going to talk a good deal about Jewish law. And Jewish law, there's supposed to be this trial. And I guess the Mary's going to get to some of this in a minute, but most of you have probably heard the saying. They started attributing it to Benjamin Franklin. It's better that 100 guilty men go free than for one innocent man to be punished unfairly. And then people got all upset. No, that was an Englishman named Blackstone, and it's Blackstone's ratio. And Blackstone said it's better for 10 criminals to go free than for one. And then, but if you look, there's a 300 years before Blackstone, there's a Jewish scholar named Maimonides that said it's better for 1,000 criminals to escape than for one innocent man to be. That idea, it's better for a lot of criminals to get by with it than for one innocent man, is a Jewish product. It goes way back. There's an awful lot about our legal system, our alphabet, and a bunch of other things that go back to ancient Hebrew. But the point is, the Jewish legal system has been set up specifically to make sure that an innocent person is not condemned and punished, is not found guilty. And so you want to talk about that now?
Yeah. Okay. So this is what we're going to do is I'm going to give some examples or understanding of Hebrew law or the Mosaic Code as it pertained to a capital trial. And then we're going to, obviously, the arrest and trial and crucifixions story is in all four Gospels, and we're going to read two of them. But I want you to hear this before we read the two counts in the Gospel.
The reason being, what we're going to show you is this trial, this conviction, this execution could not happen. It was so egregious. It was unthinkable that they should have done the things that they did. It's beyond egregious. It just couldn't happen, and yet it did.
So, and remember, Jesus was arrested, what they believed to be Thursday night, and there was a Thursday night trial, Friday morning trial, and then another Friday morning trial. The first is the Jewish trial, then the Roman trial, and you'll understand why. And for me, who have heard it all of my life, I sort of knew that, but it's two separate trials, and there's a reason, okay? So Hebrew law, and it's also called the Mosaic Code as it pertains to capital trials. As Scott says, the first thing you have to know is the purpose of these laws was to protect the accused. That was the number one purpose. Capital trials could not be conducted at night or during festivals. That was part of Hebrew law. And that rule applied to the entire proceedings, from the arrest to the execution. So you could not arrest someone at night or execute them at night or try them at night. That's Hebrew law. It was everybody knew it, okay? You could not reach a verdict that called for a death penalty sentence in one day. The trial had to be at least 2 days to do that. It was written down, everybody knew it. And so some of these things, when you listen to how Jesus responded, we always knew, obviously Jesus is smart and he was very clever, but with words, but so many of the things make sense when you hear it again. The proceedings could not be in a single day. And at least 2 to 3 witnesses had to be brought to establish guilt, and each witness had to testify to all essential elements. Do you want to add on that one?
Yeah, because witness becomes a big deal. We use that word, but it is a big deal in Jewish law. So first of all, as Mary said, it had to be at least 2 witnesses. One witness cannot convict anybody under Jewish law. There's some civil things over property sometimes, but in criminal cases, one person cannot convict anyone. And the way it worked was that it had to be a qualified witness. And that means it had to be 2 qualified witnesses. So first of all, to be a witness, It has to be something you saw with your own eyes or something that you heard with your own ears. Two people walk into a house. One of them comes out covered in blood. The other one's inside stabbed to death, but there's nobody else in the house. There are no witnesses. And you can say, well, it stands to reason that the person who came out with the blood is guilty. There are no witnesses. And that seems sort of silly to us, but there's no circumstantial evidence. You have to see it. Now, this comes up, the idea of witnesses. You can only testify to what you've seen with your own eyes. And within churches, that term witness gets used a lot. But the fact is, you can testify to what you've seen. I've seen lives change. I've seen, people that became different people. This is what I've seen. Jesus at one point sends out these followers. He sends out 72. He sends them out in pairs. He sends them out in twos because they're witnesses. And you go out in twos because two people testifying carries weight. One person doesn't. It's not an accident. And then the people who could be a witness, if you were a gambler, someone who gambled with dice, you can't be a witness under Jewish law. If you are someone who traps doves, they sold doves in the temple courts, but they also gambled. They would race doves, and these people were considered, just and a drunkard. And you go down the list, there are all sorts of people who are just not eligible to be witnesses in the Jewish system. Strangely, shepherds cannot, they were seen as being unreliable, the next thing to gypsies, and they've got all sorts of terms. And so when the angels come and announce Jesus' birth to shepherds, and it says they go out and tell everyone, they couldn't have legally been witnesses in a court of law. And you think, how does that make sense? But it fits a pattern. And if you think about it, more things become clear when you realize. One last one I'm going to mention, by the way, and I hate to say this, but I have to, women could not be witnesses in this sort of a trial. That was where they were not reliable, and certainly not one that involved technology. But they one of the other things about people who couldn't be witnesses was they said anyone who eats in the street is only about a step above a dog, and they're not reliable. And it made me laugh when I read that it was just last night. I had gone through all of these different things. Mary and I are in Israel. We used to stop in and get croissants on the way to work. And they always wanted to give us a table, and they seemed very distressed that we would come in and take it with us. And finally, Mary said something about what's the big deal. And she says, well, it's not very civilized or dignified or something. So it turns out that people who eat in the streets and are no better than dogs are us. But the point of this is that two witnesses had to be called. And what would happen is they would bring them in, and I guess I should say before this even happens, somebody has to file a complaint. The court, the Sanhedrin, doesn't initiate trials. Only complaining sort of witnesses, people who say this person, they have to come in and make a complaint. And then they bring in witnesses. And what they'll do is bring them in one at a time. And everyone else has to leave the room except the judge, what amount to the judges, the people, the person making the complaint or the people, and the person who's been accused. And then the witness tells their story. And then they send that one out and they bring in another one and they testify. And if the stories don't agree, they cancel both of them. This is the process. This is designed to protect the person who's been accused. So knowing all of that, I'll go back. But the witnesses. Oh, one last thing: the word for witness. No. This is something, because things are lost in translation. The word for witness in Greek during this time is martyros. That's martyr. A martyr is someone who bears witness to something. Sometimes they're killed for it, and we've learned to think of martyr as only someone who's killed. But a martyr is actually someone in that time. Martyros is someone who bears witness. That's what we've got going on in the trial.
Scott, go ahead.
So could a non-Jew be a witness?
No, that's a good point. I didn't throw that one in there. There's a long list. Only a Jew can be a witness in one of these trials. Only. That is absolute.
And contrast that to the Roman trial. Could
Well,
We'll get to the
That's
Roman
it.
trial. You'll have to bear. We're going to do that next week, but it's a totally different situation.
Okay, so Scott talked about the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin were the judges, and there was never a trial with one judge. For very small things, they would have 3 Sanhedrins. Then there's another group of 23 Sanhedrins that would
The
judge
Sanhedrin is the organization, but 23 judges. Yeah.
judges. And 71 was called the Great Sanhedrin. Okay. So there was never a time that there'd be one judge. Okay. Which is important when we listen to the story going forward. The Sanhedrin could not convene until after the morning sacrifice. This goes back to one of Jean's questions about religion versus law or government. They were very much intertwined, and to the Jews, these trials had to be very much God.
They were designed to be God-centered, and so doing this after the morning sacrifice would be that these people would be in that frame of mind. They would be justified, and so they would come in and carry out a just verdict. The one other thing that you have to know, and it's another study, you just have to take my word for it for now. But the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Sanhedrin, the people who were running the show, were no longer truly. It was not about God anymore. They were politicians, and they had been installed first by a group of people called Seleucids. They were Alexander the Great's generals. That when he died, so they came in and they sort of got rid of the ones who really paid attention to God's word, and they installed politicians that were puppets. And then the Romans came, and now they have carried it even further. They've gotten rid of the Seleucids, but the people that they put in charge of Judaism are very much politicians. And so things like not doing anything till after the morning sacrifice, not doing a court case, they don't care about that. I mean, it's a formality.
They do it though.
But they sort of, if they don't keep complying with the formalities, then the people, the lower level people are going to go, hey, wait a minute, you're not following the law here. What's going on? So they follow the letter of the law scrupulously because they need to, but it's not because they believe in God's word at all.
Yeah, they're not doing the morning sacrifice to ask for God's help. Here's a really weird one, but a unanimous vote would result in an acquittal. So if you had 71 Sanhedrins voting on a case and it was unanimous, they would say that the accused was acquitted because they feared a mob verdict. Their thought was that someone would be voting to acquit this person. So if it was unanimous, something was wrong.
It's a sign that the accused didn't have an advocate within the system. And that seems odd, but if it came up unanimous, the rule was, that's a sign this was a railroad job. Nothing is that, they're going to have someone, and they need to have someone there to advocate for them. They're actually supposed to take time to go out and look for witnesses to help the defense. And what Mary said, in Jerusalem is the Great Sanhedrin. It's 71. Then they have lower courts that are 23, and out in the countryside, it says every town, but it's every town of any respectable size has got its own Sanhedrin
of 3 judges
of at least 3. But yeah, the Great Sanhedrin is only in Jerusalem.
Okay, so trials were to be held in Jerusalem in a place called the Chamber of the Hewn Stones. And it was basically a room adjacent or a place adjacent to the temple in Jerusalem. And that's where, when you had a capital trial, it was very specific. That's where it was supposed to be held, which is important for the story when we listen to it.
The altar, the temple, the Holy of Holies they were instructed not to use cut stone. They were all rough stone. So they had this hall built for themselves that's made out of nice square blocks. It's the Hall of Hewn Stone. If you read it, there's a reason for all of this.
Okay, as Scott said, the defense was expected to call witnesses. I already said that one. Okay. Judas could not be a witness because he was an accomplice. Do you want to, and I have one more after that, but do you want to just?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff seems pretty twisted to us, but they have these rules that an accomplice, I'm not going to let an accomplice come in and testify on this person's behalf, come to their defense when they're an accomplice in the crime. And if I'm not going to let them testify for the defense, I'm not going to let them testify for the prosecution either. So they're absolutely barred from the proceedings. Judas couldn't have been a witness.
Okay. And this is important for why we end up with two trials and everything. At the time of Jesus's crucifixion, Jews had lost the right of enforcing the death penalty. The Jews were permitted by the Romans to try a capital case. And if the verdict was an acquittal, if the result was an acquittal, the Romans would not interfere. If the verdict of guilty was found, then the Jews were compelled to lead the prisoner to the Roman governor, which we'll find out next week is Pilate, to review and retry the case. So that is why there was two trials to begin with, okay? There's the Jewish trial and the Roman trial. So the Jews could try someone for a capital case. They could acquit them, and then the Romans would say, okay, they'd have nothing to do with it. If they found them guilty, they'd have to turn them over to the Romans to be reviewed and tried again. Okay. So.
Well, there's two other quick things. One of them is the idea that someone has to bring the complaint. The Sanhedrin never initiates a trial. They don't charge people. They respond when someone else has brought charges. And if you remember the story of the woman at the well, where they were accusing her of adultery, they were gonna stone her, and Jesus comes up, and whatever he drew in the dirt, he finally says, any of you who are without sin, cast the first stone. The people who bring charges, if it results in stoning, actually have the responsibility of the first stone. A lot of the time that would be a great big one that would sort of nearly kill them anyway, because they didn't want them to suffer, strangely. But if any one of you are without sin, cast the first stone. And all of them sort of slunk away. And if you remember what Jesus said to her, he says, is there anyone here to accuse you? And she says, no. And he says, then neither do I accuse you. And if there's not someone there making an accusation, there's no trial. It's important. That's the way it's done. So.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick again and show you a map, because before we still have one more thing to do before we end up reading these passages. And I want to show you, this is Jerusalem at the time of Jesus's, the time of the Passion Week, if you will. And some of the important things to know: Garden of Gethsemane, that's where Jesus was arrested. Bethany is where he stayed prior to, during Holy Week, he would come in and go back out to Bethany. Here's the temple area. And I guess we'll show a more detailed map next time.
Hold on, don't put that off yet.
Yeah.
As much as we're pressed for time, this is important. If what he's come from the east. He's run over through Jericho and headed straight for Jerusalem. So when he gets down far enough, Bethany is Mary and Martha, but then here's this place called Bethpage, some call it Bethphage, and it's just outside of Jerusalem and the temple. on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, you're not allowed to travel more than about a mile. You can go a very short distance. It sits at exactly the distance that you can travel on Shabbat and not get in trouble, the distance from Jerusalem. And out here in Bethphage, and I'll get to the name in a minute, but this is a place where one of these lower 23-person Sanhedrin meets, and capital crimes all have to be tried. They get tried in town, but they have to be sort of certified, ratified in Bethphage. People who are being exiled, who are being put outside the camp for being heretics, blasphemers. If it's not bad enough for a capital for capital punishment, they get put outside the camp. They get exiled. That all happens. It's where they do their dirty work. If there's something that has to do with a dead body, they examine it out here because that's not supposed to come in and pollute Jerusalem. They determine the dimensions of the temple and all kinds of stuff. This Bethphage is sort of ground zero for legalism. It all gets done outside the city walls, all right? And if you remember, there's a story, and we told it in the last study, where Jesus comes up and finds a fig tree and it doesn't have any figs, and he curses it, and it withers and dies. And people hear that story and they go, what the heck is that about? He couldn't get a snack and he cursed a fig tree. Bethphage literally means the place of unripe figs. That's what the town is named. And it's the place where all of these people sit in judgment, and they decide who's unworthy of being part of Israel, who's a heretic and who isn't. They have institutionalized this legalism, and it all takes place right here in Bethphage is the place of unripe figs. Now, if you remember, this has taken place at Passover. There's no way figs would be ripe at that time. I mean, we live there. I mean, it's like this. The weather's a lot like this. Figs aren't ripe by now. He knew he wasn't going to go find ripe figs on a fig tree at Passover. So something else is going on here. And the question is what? Because the story's been puzzling, and I grew up being told that means if you don't produce fruit, God's going to make you wither up and dry and blow away. He was talking about this court, this place of unripe figs, and the fruit that they produced. They were not producing fruit for the kingdom. We studied the kingdom of God last week, and they knew. Believe me, they knew this was a curse on them. And it was only a few years after they crucified him that this all gets taken away. And that court is gone forever. They wind up moving some of the stuff up into the Galilee area. But if you've ever heard that story, and I know you did if you were here the last couple of weeks, it's got nothing to do with the fig tree. It is about the place of unripe figs, and he cursed it and said, you're not producing fruit for the kingdom. They knew what he was talking about. Unfortunately, it's lost on us. Okay, anyway, so then he comes into town. Back to the story already in progress.
Okay, couple of, so that's the places, the players. You're going to hear about Annas. He was a former high priest, and he had been the high priest for a number of years. 20 years before this, he was deposed by the procreator named Gratus for imposing and executing a capital sentence. So that's interesting. They said, you're no longer the high priest. But so the Romans told him he was no longer a high priest, which is sort of the mixture of, why are the Romans deciding who's a high priest? But that's for another story. But Annas was no longer the high priest, but the Jewish people gave him that power. So even though he wasn't the high priest because he was deposed 20 years before, he was very respected in the Jewish quarters. Caiaphas was Annas's father-in-law, and he was the high priest at the time of this trial. Saying all that, we are now with 12 minutes left. We are going to go and read John 18. And like I said, you can read, and I hope you do read the Passion story in all the Gospels, but we're going to start. And just like, we talk about why are these stories in 4 Gospels? It's just like when we see something and come back and tell a story. If I tell the story, I'm going to emphasize one thing. If Scott tells the story, he's going to emphasize the other thing. So that's important when people always want to like debunk the Bible because they're not, 4 stories are not exactly the same. If they were exactly the same, we wouldn't need 4 of them, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to read John 18, verses 1 through 24. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where they entered a garden. Now Judas, his betrayer, also knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a band of soldiers and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees. They arrived at the garden carrying lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was coming upon him, stepped forward and asked them, "Whom are you seeking?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they answered. Jesus said, "I am he." And Judas, his betrayer, was standing there with him. When Judas said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. He asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they answered. "I told you that I am he," Jesus replied. "So if you were looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word he had spoken. "I have not lost one of those you have given me." Then Simon Peter drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. "Put your sword back in the sheath," Jesus said to Peter. "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the band of soldiers, with its commander and the officers of the Jews, arrested Jesus and bound him. They brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. And Caiaphas was the one who advised the Jews that it would be better if one man died for the people. Now Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. And by the way, I'm going to stop there for a second. This is from the book of John, and it is believed that that other disciple was John. So he's writing about himself. Now Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he also went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside the door. Then the disciple who was known to the high priest went out and spoke to the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. At this, the servant girl watching the door said to Peter, "Aren't you also one of this man's disciples?" "I am not," he answered. Because it was cold, the servants and the officers were standing around a charcoal fire they had made to keep warm. And Peter was also standing with them, warming himself. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. "I have spoken openly to the world," Jesus answered. "I have always taught in the synagogues and at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? Ask those who heard my message. Surely they know what I said." Then Jesus said this. One of the officers standing nearby, when Jesus had said this, one of the officers standing nearby slapped him in the face and said, "Is this how you answer the high priest?" Jesus replied, "If I said something wrong, testify as to what was wrong. But if I spoke correctly, why did you strike me?" Then Annas sent him, still bound, to Caiaphas, the high priest.
So there's so much wrong with this, it's almost hard to know where to start.
It was nighttime first.
There was a point, I think last week, where we talked about Nicodemus, and these people had met, the chief priests had met, the council had met, and they'd already determined they were going to kill him. And Nicodemus said, "Is this the way we do things? We determine it before the accused has even had a chance to speak? You can't do it." That's what he was speaking about. Judas, there's a point where that one of the Gospels, I should remember which, but it says that he decided to betray Jesus, and he went to him and said, "How much will you give me if I make him available to you?" And they said they'd pay him. And he said, it says that he began to look for a way to deliver Jesus without a crowd. The reason they hadn't already taken him is, and I read those so you understand, they feared the crowds. Judas was looking for a way. There was no question they were going to arrest him and they were going to kill him, but they were afraid of the people. And Judas started looking for a way to hand him over without a crowd. And that's all they needed. That's all they wanted. Now, you see that it's at night. You see that the temple guards have come and they have initiated this on their own. There's no one who's filed a complaint. If you don't have an accuser, there is no trial. They can't initiate an arrest, and yet they do. And they send these people in to arrest him. Judas has told them he's going to be out on the Mount of Olives. I know he goes there, and there won't be any crowds. Right?
And so they said, and they bring him to Annas. First of all, they bring him to Annas was a member of the Sanhedrin, even though he was no longer a high priest. And one person, one judge, one Sanhedrin is never to question somebody. He is questioning somebody.
You're not allowed, and the other one I didn't mention, under Jewish law, you may not testify against yourself. This prohibition we have on self-incrimination, or the Fifth Amendment, once again, under Jewish law, you cannot testify against yourself. It's not allowed. And they're not even supposed to be asking. They bring him to the house of Annas, who used to be high priest. He's not even high priest anymore, right? He's nobody. But they bring him to this one guy's house at night without a complaint, without someone to, and he begins to question him and try to get him to testify against himself. It's illegal. You just keep going down the line. The guy who hit him, the guard who hit him, they're not allowed to mistreat people who've been accused. They're not allowed to do it, because until you're convicted, there's a presumption that you're innocent and you're just a regular Jewish citizen. And they're not allowed to just go beat people when they want to. There is so much wrong with this already. And then.
So first of all, John's the only one, as you put these together, John's the only one that has Jesus going to Annas first and then to Caiaphas. The rest of them don't talk about Annas. Doesn't mean he didn't go to Annas. They both, some of the things we read said Annas' palace or apartment was probably near Caiaphas, who was the high priest at this time. I'm now going to read Mark 14, starting at verse 53 to 65. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and scribes assembled. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and he sat with the officers and warmed himself by the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they did not find any. For many bore false witness against Jesus, but their testimony was inconsistent. Then some men stood up and testified falsely against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this man-made temple, and in 3 days I will build another that is made without hands. But even their testimony was inconsistent. So the high priest stood up before them and questioned Jesus. Have you no answer? What are these men testifying against you? But Jesus remained silent and made no reply. Again, the high priest questioned him. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with clouds of heaven. At this, the high priest tore his clothes and declared, "Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What is your verdict?" They all condemned him as deserving of death.
Once again, how do you come up with all the things wrong? Nighttime, the great Sanhedrin meets every single day, except Shabbat, obviously, during the daytime. They convened at the guy's, and they meet in the Hall of Hewn Stones. They convened at the guy's house, and they start going out and looking for, bringing in witnesses. That's not their job. In fact, they're not allowed to do it, but they're desperately looking for anyone to accuse and condemn him. And I had always wondered when I was little, well, if they brought in these false witnesses and they testified, why wasn't that a done deal? Well, it's because they bring them in one at a time and their stories don't add up. And they kept doing it. And he begins, you can see the high priest is frustrated. He's not getting what he wants. And finally, two people make that one, they sort of agreed, but even their testimony was inconsistent. You can't put someone to death on inconsistent testimony. And so in his anger, he turns to Jesus and says, "What do you have to say? Do you hear what they're saying about you? What do you have to say?" He's not even allowed to ask him that, but he's angry. He's frustrated. He's being thwarted in what he wants to do. And Jesus doesn't say anything, which is more than his right. And you see what a railroad job this is. If Jesus had testified, it's not usable. You can't testify against yourself. It's not admissible. They don't care. At this point, they just want to come up and see what happens is if they arrest him with the crowds, the people are going to rise up. But once you're in the belly of the beast, once they've got you and they say he was tried and convicted, people are going to go, "Oh, well, hey, I don't want to step. If he's been tried and convicted, there must have been a good reason." So they've got to have this trial. They've got to have this show, but it was only ever going to come out one way.
And we're at time. But, and so what happens now? So first of all, remember, it's not 2 days. That the Sanhedrin did not do the morning sacrifice because it's still in the middle of the night. And
it was unanimous. It says the people that were there, it was unanimous. He didn't have an advocate. And they just say, yeah, no, guilt. They throw a vote with no right to do it. That comes up unanimous. That should have disqualified it. But Mary started out mentioning that the Jews have now been banned from carrying out capital punishment without the approval of the governor. And there's only one acceptable outcome in this for them. He has to die. They could have excommunicated him, but then he's back out in the countryside and there are going to be crowds following him. And we can't have that. So they've got to kill him. And after this unanimous decision, they pack him up
and send him to Pilate. So that's part 2. Next week, he's being sent to Pilate. And then it's the Roman trial, and we'll see what a mess that was too. Prayer, sorry.
God, we see injustice in the world around us. Sometimes we believe that it's directed at us, and it is, and we don't understand. But we look at the story, we look at the injustice, we look at the abuse of power. And we see in this Jesus who was going towards it willingly, who not only accepted it, but welcomed it, who made provision for it. And in that, we see the plan that you've always had. We see the meaning behind this and the plan you had for us and the willingness you had for the sacrifice, the atonement for us. And we don't always know what to say about it. We're in awe of that, and we are grateful for it. We thank you for, as always, the words that are left behind, the assurance that we have of these things that we believe. We ask that you be with us remind us that we're told that Jesus said, if they do it to me, they're going to do it to you as well, that this is a part of our existence. And we're thankful above all that you're always there with us, that you're with us during these times that we go through. And we see that you had your hand on your son as he went through this, and we're grateful. Amen.
Amen. Okay.
Stop recording or stop the meeting? Stop recording.
Okay.